Hello viewers, welcome to another video for the History Valley podcast with your host Jacob Berman. Today I am joined by Aron Ra, and I've been watching his videos for many years. I've been a big fan of his YouTube channel, and I am very happy that he accepted my invitation to come to my channel. And I have several questions for him, and we're going to be talking about science disproving the Bible on numerous occasions. And so has archaeology. He's done many videos like how zoology disproves Noah's flood, how archaeology disproves Noah's flood, and many other videos like that. And I have some questions about those, and we're going to get into that. Christians basically, apologists basically deliberately misinterpreting history, misrepresenting history to try to bend it to fit their point of view, which is very concerning. And they have large following too that buy into that crap. And I want to talk about that as well. All right. So my first question is, when you were younger, because I heard that from what I've read and listened to, when you were younger, you were kind of were you somewhat religious when you were younger, not or in between. In a way.
Well, yeah, in between would probably be a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's what I got.
The background that you use, is that Trinity College in Dublin?
I think it is.
Yep, I've been to that library. All right. So I was raised in a Mormon household.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And I was baptized Mormon, but I never identified as Mormon.
Right.
And the reason that I didn't was because I thought logically that how could I know if I am Mormon, because I would have to believe everything required of a Mormon, and right. I don't know all of the required beliefs. So, and I don't know anything about any other religions. So how could I know that one of those other faiths wouldn't more align with me? And then it seems a strange thing, but I'm kind of shocked that nobody else thinks that way. I mean, how would you know that you are this religion or that religion? You don't know all of the little idiosyncrasies.
Right.
Do you know if you were Christian? Are you Baptist? Are you Southern Baptist? You know, I mean, how would you know all of these particulars? People just, whatever my parents are, that's whatever I am. I just put on the T-shirt, and that's what religion means to most people. But it doesn't to me. I took it sincerely. So.
Right.
So I never identified as Mormon. If I had the term non-denominational, I might have tried that, but I believed that Jesus was real and all of that, because I mean my family raised me with all of these lies telling me that God is a conclusively proven scientific fact.
Right.
Yeah, and it took me a while to realize that none of that was true.
Right.
That God is just something you make believe. Not when people say that they believe, they mean I make believe. They're pretending.
Right. He's like he's the adult Santa Claus.
Right. Very much. And so I thought sincerely that there were. I was raised in the 1970s. I was a kid in the 1970s, and there was all of the pseudoscience nonsense. I was in Los Angeles for a lot of my childhood. And so there were there's a lot of pseudoscience documentaries talking about, scientific evidence for telekinesis or telepathy or whatever. Right. And so all of these pseudoscience TV shows. And I think, because I'm a 12-year-old kid and watching TV, I'm thinking that all of this is vetted, that you wouldn't have this on television of just people lying to people, right?
Right.
I've learned since that, yeah, you can have TV shows where they just lie. And now it is the History Channel that is just lying.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's frustrating, isn't it? When the History Channel is talking about ancient aliens and extraterrestrial reptiles and human guides. But this is our History Channel.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a little frustrating. But you can imagine how I would do as a little kid. So I thought that all of these, even the atheists in the 70s believed that people had psionic powers and such. I mean, everybody that watched Star Trek believed in Spock's mind meld, or they believed it, like in Star Wars, they believed in telekinesis there and astral projection, and that physical bodies were animated by a spiritual life force of some sort. I bought into all that too. But I began, I wanted to investigate it because I wanted to understand it. It wasn't just asking a question of, is this real or not? I wanted to know what the real data was, because I'm getting conflicting information. When anybody gives you two different answers, you wonder which one of those answers is right.
Precisely. I remember when I was younger, and I was researching a bunch of conspiracy
Meanwhile, to
theories.
realize that both of the answers, and in every case, all of the answers I was getting were wrong.
When I was younger, I remember researching a bunch of conspiracy theories. This was like 7 years ago. And there's like contradictory versions of conspiracy theories like the New World Order. They can't make up their minds which secret society is doing it, which aliens are doing it, if they're all in on it at the same time. And I'm like, it occurred to me, like, you know what? It's BS. I mean, they can't make up their minds on who's doing what. And then you look at the claims that they make about history and how they tie into these secret societies, like the Knights Templar survived and they became this or that or whatever. And they try to string together things like the Illuminati with that. They jump at that in there, or they throw David Icke in there too, and there's a huge like massive crossover with these conspiracy theories, and it goes out of whack.
My mother was trying to turn me on to some secret truth stuff that she said that my mainstream news wasn't going to have this kind of privy information, right, that only that only the select elite will know this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was a David Icke video, and I had to tell her who he was, and why anything that has his name on it is. It's kind of like when you watch a movie and it has Mel Gibson's name in the credits, that's not historical.
Right.
If his name is anywhere in the credits, voice actor, director, whatever.
Yeah, it's just endless conspiracy theories, and then there's different kinds of conspiracy theories about ancient history. Like the things the nonsense that they say about the pyramids, or David Icke talking about, okay, so thousands of years ago, a bunch of reptilians came down and and they're still here somehow. The moon matrix and all these ridiculous theories that he came up with.
The one I hate the most is that reality isn't real, that we're all living in the matrix.
Right.
So God made it so that we would have an in-depth and very, very precise understanding of how olfactory senses work. We have molecules of whatever chemicals that are floating through the air, and we're able to receive them, or the way that photons bounce off the cones in our retina, and how we can understand sight. But none of these things are real because atoms are not real. So God is this nth level trickster who creates all of these complex explanations that none of them are valid, because everything is just whatever you want to imagine it is. Because that's the problem with reality denial.
Right.
They want, and I've seen this countless times. Your truth is not my truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's true for me, doesn't have to be true for you. And reality or truth, either one, interchangeable, they are whatever you want them to be.
Right.
I got into an argument with a professor of philosophy at a Christian seminary school. And his argument was that nothing can ever be objectively verified, because we each have our own personal reality. And so I'm just a character in his dream world, and he's a character in mine.
It's like, in other words, it's like they're saying we're living in Yahweh's delusion.
Or a dream of Brahma was the original way that was put out.
Or that, yeah. And the thing is, it's so odd that he would say that nothing can be objectively proven real. Then, like, I wonder how he determined Christianity is real. That's mind-boggling.
Again, it's a personal God. So That's why you have all of these different denominations. But why is it that Jesus / Allah / Abba, Jehovah, whatever, why does he give contradictory messages to his followers?
Right.
Why is it that everybody's personal God hates all the same things that they hate and tolerates and excuses all of the same things that they tolerate and excuse?
It's like their understanding of God is really a projection of themselves.
Exactly. It is themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. Um, I also want to talk about a bit about answers in Genesis and Kent Hovind and that stuff. Like, it concerns me that they can say something like, okay, so what happened is 6,000 years ago, the dinosaurs were flooded over just about that time, and that's when they really died, according to them and their pseudo-historical beliefs. And despite despite the fact that the fossils have been dated with proper scientific methodology in many different ways, and it can be shown to have happened about 65 million years ago, not 6,000 years ago. But despite that, they're still believing that it happened more recently. And then there are others.
They're still make believing, because that's what this is all about.
Right.
They know what the facts are. Ken Ham has admitted on television that he knows what the facts are. He simply rejects them because he wants to believe, make believe, an alternate reality that he's created this buzz, and he doesn't want us to harsh his buzz. He's created it's everybody else to agree that they're all going to make believe in the same fantasy, and that way they think their fantasy will be true, at least for them. Right. But he knows that fossils have been found of dinosaurs with brain cancer, and he knows that. But he says he's got his magic book of fables. He has a storybook that said that God created everything and it was good. Well, how could it have been good if dinosaurs had brain cancer 65 million years before we showed up? So he simply ignores the fact and adheres to the storybook. And they use very dishonest tactics that they know are dishonest tactics in how they defend this, because it is make-believe. They know it's not truth. They want to pretend. And the idea is, if they pretend hard enough, it's like you might probably heard sermons where they say, if you believe hard enough. Well, how do you believe hard enough if you're not pretending?
Exactly.
That's exactly what pretending is.
And then they'll say, well, you didn't have enough faith. Well, how do I have enough faith? Well, how do you measure the level of faith that one person has?
Yeah. And so Jesus says that anybody of his followers would be able to do all of the miracles that he did, and they would be able to do greater miracles than he did if they just believe hard enough.
But they can't seem to do it.
Yeah. Well, because if you believe that it's already happened, I mean, it's like what Jesus said, just when you pray for something, pray for it believing you've already received it. He said that in the story. I don't believe Jesus ever said anything that's attributed to him. Not necessarily. We know that there's at least a handful of people. There's at least a handful of stories about Jesus that we know are fictitious, that were made up after the alleged fact.
Right.
And I have no reason to believe any of it. I don't believe any exact quotes, especially not when we have like all of this dialogue from where Jesus is in Gethsemane, and everybody and people who were not with him somehow recorded everything he said when he was off by himself.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess what they might say is, well, what happened is, since God's everywhere, he told somebody.
Yeah, he comes back, and right as everybody's waking up, and he hasn't had a chance to talk to anybody yet, there's Judas and the Romans. So there goes that.
And the other thing is, I remember that one thing that mind boggles me. This is from reading the Old Testament. There's two versions of the census of David. One version where God gets pissed off and 3,000 die. Another version where it's Satan instead. And they'll try to say, well, I think if I remember correctly, somebody said, "Oh, well, what happened is God sent Satan to do it." So it's the same story. And you go to the Gospel of John, and I tend to think the author of the Gospel of John's I think the author of the Gospel of John read this and got confused. And he tried to resolve the situation in a very strange way by saying, "Well, Jesus, he has Jesus saying, 'I and the Father are one,' John 10:30, and and somewhere else in there he'll have Jesus saying, 'The Jews are the sons of the devil.'"
Yeah.
In it's an interesting situation there because it's practically saying that the devil is God and Jesus is also God. I feel like the author of the Gospel of John was harmonizing contradictions in the Old Testament, reading the other Gospels too at the same time. It's like, screw it, they're the same guy. It's God having schizophrenia or whatever.
Well, the concept of the Trinity
Yeah.
is itself an attempt to harmonize an earlier contradiction.
Right.
Because when Jesus says, "No one comes to the Father but by me," that's a violation of the very first commandment in Exodus 20, where thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody will say that Jesus is God, except that Jesus doesn't say that he's God. As a matter of fact, he always describes God as being someone else, somewhere else, who knows things Jesus doesn't know and can do things Jesus can't do. And so if you want to meet God, you have to go through Jesus. Jesus is going to be the introductor. And if you didn't know me, then I won't know you when we get to God. So Jesus is putting God as a separate person.
Right.
And Jesus is praying to God, right? He's not praying to himself.
Exactly.
When he wants to give up the cup, take this cup away from me, not because I will it, but because you will it. Is he talking to himself? Clearly not.
Right.
And when people say, well, there's this line that Jesus says, I and God are one. Yeah, he does say that. And you notice later in the same book, he also prays to God in third person, asking if his disciples can also be one with God just as he is one with God.
Right.
So he's asking God, can my disciples be one with you also? Which means Jesus ain't God. It's not possible to interpret Jesus as God. Okay, so to bring up, well, Jesus said, before Abraham, I am. Okay, yeah. Jesus is saying that he's a created being, that he existed before Abraham, that God created him first. But he's not saying that he is Yahweh. That interpretation is not possible. Not in context with everything else.
Right. Yeah. So that takes me back to the deceptive archaeology scenario, and there are some Christians out there that'll say, screw it, Satan planted these bones to test our faith, or God did it.
Why would either one need to test faith? That would imply that either one are not omniscient, right? I mean, the so-called devil wouldn't give a flying crap about your faith, and God is supposed to know everything already. So he already knows. So why do you have to pray to God? God already knows whether he's going to answer your prayer. He already knows whether you're going to pray to him. He already knows what you're going to ask him and why. And he knows what the answer is going to be. So shut up and just let it happen, because that's what's going to happen anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think if this were ever to happen, and this is something that does concern me every time I think about it, do you think if this ever happens in the future, that somehow religion overpowers society again like it did during the Dark Ages? Do you think all of this, including everything we just talked about, if it's ever forced upon people, could that throw us into another Dark Age, potentially?
Yeah, well, I'll ask me that question after the next election.
I will.
We are so close to it. If Republicans get the upper hand again, we were already in a very, very dark place and heading for a much darker place. The United States almost ended as an experiment under Donald Trump, and we were so close to just losing. Donald Trump was not going to be our next president; he was going to be our last president. And that's what it was working out to be. And if he or someone like him, if not just the president, I'm talking about, when you have a majority Republican again, shit's going to get really, really bad. I mean, look at Texas, where they're just trying to pass as many bullshit laws to fuck up things for everybody as they can, unabashedly, so that we don't want black and brown people to be able to vote. We don't want women to have any kind of governance over their own bodies. We want to create a system where we have a clear division between the haves and the have-nots. Fuck the middle class. What have they ever done for us? Let's have it so that the rich people don't have to pay taxes and the poor people have to carry our load. That's what the GOP is shooting for. And with the kind of beliefs that anybody that is not the right-wing conservative Republican is therefore a baby-eating Satan worshiper. I mean, I'm told that I am satanic simply because I'm not Christian. I'm told that Muslims are satanic also because they're not Christian. Then the Muslims tell me that the Christians follow Satan as well.
Right.
So we're all going to hell in somebody's religion.
Yep.
And the shitty thing is that these people believe in the most fucking ridiculous conspiracy theories. I mean, what is the name of that woman? She's some kind of evangelical big deal where she says that she has personal conversations with God on a daily basis, where he physically shows up in her room to yell things at her. And she brings on these conversations, and then like all her associates also have regular daily encounters with a physical Jesus who shows up, and they have these two-way discussions. And you know that these people are absolutely out of their minds.
Right.
But there's hordes of idiots that eagerly swallow this crap. The more ridiculous, the better. And the sad thing is I know I have family and friends who refuse to believe that COVID-19 exists. They refuse to believe that the virus is real.
And there's another conspiracy theory out there that the 5G towers were creating the coronavirus, and a simple look at the geography shows that there are 5G. There are some locations where there's no 5G towers, and there's hotspots for COVID.
We are so fantastically stupid as a species that we were clearly out of our position when we named our species Homo sapiens sapiens, man the wise, because we are fucking idiots. Look at the way we vote. So damn dumb. And the very idea, if anything, there's so many people in my family and friends that if there's a word of truth in it, then they don't want to hear it. Mm-hmm. They only want to hear outrageous, paranoid ravings. That's it. It's got to be emotional, and it's got to be insane, or else they don't care. And anything that has to do with, what we could do as a people, if we band together, if we work together, we could accomplish anything. Well, that's socialism. So somehow our greatest ability, the fact that we can work together and accomplish any goal, that's evil somehow. We shouldn't share anything. We shouldn't work together. Everybody should be a damned island, their own individualist. I don't get it. When did we become so fucking stupid?
Right. So, let me think. In the early 2nd century, there's this guy called Marcion, and I think he read the Gospel of John, because what's interesting about him is he came to the conclusion, by trying to harmonize these issues, that, okay, well, Jesus is the son of a merciful God, while the Jewish God is the devil. That's pretty much what he was saying. And Yahweh is the demiurge. But Jesus, in Christianity, it's taught that, okay, well, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're screwed. And Jesus, in the long run, he doesn't sound as merciful to me as Yahweh is. I think the way it's presented in the New Testament might be different, but in the end of the day, the conclusion's practically the same. He's just
Jesus
brutal.
says it. You can't follow me unless you pick up your cross, unless you're going to sever relationships. You have to hate your mother and your father and your sister and your brother and your wife and even your own life to pick up your cross and follow me. You have to give up everything. For he who dies lives forever. And so just absolute double speak. And it's complete nonsense. Jesus was what little truth there is to the Jesus character is he was a first century faith healer who used the same bullshit lies as our first century faith healers still do today. Give your money to the poor, give it to me, and I'll give it to the poor.
Right.
It's like how many televangelists have fake charities? You just give me the money and I'll make sure the orphans get it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember that one of them tried to pull off this ridiculous stunt. Like, let me take. I'll put my hand next to the TV.
Yep.
And you'll feel the power, the power of God healing on coming upon you, whatever that's supposed to be.
And I have to wonder what is the emotional attachment, because there's not a rational possibility to read these stories and just think that they're true. You can't. Right. You have to convince yourself to make believe. I mean, there's no way that you could read about Lot, right? Lot's wife is conveniently removed from the picture. Mm-hmm. So he gets stupid drunk in a cave and, oh, sure, your daughters seduced you. Right. You were too drunk to know that you were fucking your own children. Right. You're so drunk. And yet, whiskey dick does not seem to be a problem for you, even when it's your own kids. Right. If you could believe that story, you could believe anything else in the Bible, because that's just as absurd as anything else.
Yep. And this takes me to the next part here. It just occurred to me to bring this up here. There are similar ridiculous things I've heard on the New Testament, like about the historical Jesus. There's some really bad theories out there, some people saying that Jesus is an alien. I'm sure you've heard about that before. And then there's another theory. This one's much weirder. It's kind of like a mythological evolution theory saying that Jesus is basically the Sumerian god Enki. And he's a friendly guy. He's real somehow. I'm like, oh, come on. And it's like, okay, so basically what you want me to believe is that, so this guy came to Earth thousands of years ago. And then basically, through reappropriation, Enki got plagiarized and his name changed over and over and over again, all the way to Jesus, and that makes Jesus real. That sounds insane. Yeah. That just sounds insane to me.
But I mean, if they read Enki, they realize that no, he is in the Bible, but it's not that character.
Right.
Enki is Adam.
Yeah, because it has to do with the Enki and Ninhursag story in a garden, and he apparently banged his great granddaughter Utu, and then Ninmah comes in there and takes the semen out of her private part and tosses it into the garden, and it grows into plants. And then Enki comes in there and he, for some reason, decides to consume some of the material of the plants or the plants.
So it was a forbidden garden, mm-hmm. and all of the fruits therein were forbidden.
Yeah.
And Enki goes in there and he's eating the forbidden fruit, not just one fruit that has magical powers, but everything in there is forbidden. And so mm-hmm. Ninhursag catches him and is outraged, and she curses him, and the immortal fell. Mm-hmm. So we have a fallen immortal. But then she wants to forgive him. And so she bore 7 daughters, one each to cure each wound that he had. And one of them, Ninti, was the daughter of the rib, for she was born to close the wound to his side.
Basically Eve.
Yes.
Yeah. And, that takes me back to the flood. Because there's a myth about Enki, because, he apparently warns me about the flood in what's called the Eridu Genesis. Although it's a little more, I think it's a little more vague, because some of the lines in there are more broken than the later copies that we have, like the Epic of Atheist, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and their flood myths. In the Epic of
But
Athens.
everything you're listing, doesn't it all come from Ashurbanipal?
Mm-hmm.
That's the only copies we have of any of that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like to me, and I've seen your videos. You talked about this too. That the flood myth, the flood story, if it's based on a historical event, it was simply a minor flood in Mesopotamia, and and it cannot possibly be this global event, and we don't
Yeah,
even have enough
and the
water.
details are the details are a lot worse than that. You know,
Right.
King Zeusudra already had livestock on a floating barge, and it's not even really a barge. When they called Noah's Ark, an ark is a box.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a boat. It doesn't have a keel. Like, Noah's Ark, the facsimile or the reproduction that they wanted to make in the Ark Park, it has a keel and a stern and all that. Why? It doesn't have any means of propulsion. So there's no point in having a means of steering, and it doesn't have any way of steering anyway. It doesn't have a rudder. There's no point in having a keel. It was a box, not a boat.
Right.
So the original formation of it was that it was a what do they call those things? I forget. It's basically a floating bowl. It's a giant bowl ship, so it's round. It's this huge bowl of reeds. He loads his livestock on it, and they punt down the river. However, when the river flooded, Zeusudra and all of his livestock get washed out into the Persian Gulf, and now he's fucked. Because obviously his punt stick won't work anymore, so he has to wait until he drifts ashore.
Right.
And then sacrifices an animal and whatever. So, and that's where we get that story from.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the ridiculous exaggerations and embellishments that go along with that. And the thing that alarms me is that anybody believes this and isn't considered crazy.
Right. And when these parallels are pointed out, they'll say, well, you see, these ancient myths are really prophecy about the Bible. It all ties in together.
Yeah. And then prophecy, just the only thing that prophecies do ever is fail.
Yeah.
And most of the prophecies in the Bible, the Christians will often cite, well, there's hundreds of prophecies. Yeah, give me one.
Right.
And it turns out they don't have any. They don't have any prophecies. Anything that a prophet said, this will happen by this time. And then it doesn't, right? Actually, we do have examples of that. I mean, Ezekiel, everything he prophesied, he had an expiration date, and they always failed. Isaiah too, his prophecies failed as well, horribly. But for a lot of these, they'll have this story. I forget who wrote it. Who when he mentions that he's having a dream, and his enemies are chasing him with hunting dogs, and they're snapping at his hands and feet like lions. And in one translation, they pierce his hands and feet, meaning that he's got hunting dogs chasing him and they're biting him. But then somebody decides that one part of that one sentence is prophetic. How? Because Jesus got his hands and feet pierced. Yeah, but that has nothing to do with the story.
I think that's in Isaiah's suffering. I think that's Isaiah's suffering servant.
No, it's not. But I can't remember where. Off the top of my head, I can't remember where.
I might be misremembering which one it is, but yeah, I mean, and the thing is, in the Gospels, that Jesus Barabbas and Jesus Christ are both brought before Pilate. So there's two Jesuses in the earlier manuscripts, and one's
there's a lot more than that. I've had Christians point out to me that Jesus ben Ananias and Jesus
Barabbas.
No, Jesus of Damnius.
Right.
They've had Christians point to both of these characters and say that's their Jesus. Like, they lived at the wrong time.
Yeah, 30 years later, unless he survived the crucifixion to become them, which doesn't make any sense.
But that happens too. I mean, you've got people that say that Jesus wasn't the one crucified. You got some people that say that it was actually Judas Iscariot that was crucified,
or Simon
and that it's referred to later in the book, because you've got two different conflicting things about who owned the potter's field. Did Judas buy that land, or did he give it back to the Pharisees, and then the Pharisees used the same money to buy that land, wherein he still died? Because he either died while his guts blew out of him as when he fell headlong, and it's kind of hard to fall headlong when your head is tied to a tree, because the other way that he died was when he was hung.
And then I was like, well, what happened is that, God's miracles, and somehow both happened at the same time. He got hung on a tree and his organs just blew up. See?
Yeah. One version that I really like is Robert Price made the suggestion that Joseph of Arimathea had the Jewish name was Josephus Bar Matthias.
Hugh Schoenfield in the book, The Passover Plot, published in 1965, he's the earliest person I can remember that made the case that Josephus Flavius was recreated as Joseph of Arimathea. I actually interviewed Dr. Price a few times. Yeah, he's a great guy to talk to. And
I thought it was fascinating when you read Luke.
Yeah.
That it appears when you read Josephus and then you read Luke, it sounds like two different people writing about the same event from different perspectives at the same time.
Yeah. And
so that the Jesus is being crucified isn't Josephus mentioned 19 different people named Jesus, and then possibly a 20th one when he mentions that he finds 3 of his friends strung up on crosses, and he goes not to Pilate but to Titus and pleads that Titus take his friends down. And then I think it was 2 of them lived and 1 died. And so it would be the 20th Jesus would be the one that died on the cross.
Exactly. And it wouldn't surprise me because the dating of the Gospels, especially recently, it's kind of, they're slowly pushing the Gospels to a later date, scholarship. And it wouldn't surprise me in tandem with that the Gospel accounts, all 4 of them, based as Joseph Arimathea character just by reading Josephus.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me at all.
What do you think about the non-canonical Gospels?
Yeah, I feel like they read early 2nd century material and earlier apocryphal material and Josephus at the same time. They took like primary sources, secondary sources to create novelized fiction. Like the Gospel of Judas. I'm trying to remember what it says. There's a strange passage in there. It's like Judas knows a secret that he shouldn't know. There's something like that in there. And Judas is portrayed differently than Jesus is in there. And the Gospel of Peter, I think it says that Jesus was crucified at the hands of, I'm not positive about this. I think it might have said Jesus was crucified at the hands of Herod Antipas instead of Pilate. And there's another text, the Doctrine of Adi, part of this Apocrypha. Now this text is really strange. There's a guy called Governor Albinus, and he's exchanging texts with Emperor Tiberius, saying, "Oh, talk about Jesus' crucifixion." But the problem is, as the translator noted, that's actually Governor Albinus in the early AD 60s. He's writing 25 years after Tiberius died. So you can't be responding to a dead man unless Arnold Schwarzenegger was time traveling to get there. But I'm like, I don't think it's a coincidence that in Josephus, Jesus ben Ananus appeared before Governor Albinus. And that right there is all I needed to see, so whoever's making this crap up just confused Jesus ben Ananus with Jesus Christ.
And then you also have Jesus of Damnius, who is like Jesus, where he has a brother named James, or James, brother of the anointed, and this is why the Christians were saying that Jesus of Damnius was their guy.
Yeah,
like you're just grasping at straws now, because we know when this guy lived, and it's the wrong character.
Yeah, exactly. And the Clementine Recognitions reads this. It's like, oh, okay. So what happened is, so Ananias is murdering James about the year AD 62. Yeah. And in the Clementine Recognitions, it says, well, Paul did it, which is really strange. It says Paul murdered James. It kind of is insinuating that they're identifying those 2 guys as the same guy. And in Acts, and Professor Robert Eisman talks about this in Acts, Stephen's death takes the place of James's death, the way it's written in the story, when you compare Josephus and Acts together. And I thought that was really interesting because there's in the Recognitions, I think it has James saying, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani instead of Jesus. He's saying, God, my God, why are you forsaking me? And I think Stephen says the same thing in Acts. I'm not positive about that part, though. But James, I know there's a text out there with James saying that, apparently, James saying this. So James appears to be, in this scenario, is taking Jesus' role. So it's like, oh, he's the guy. He's the guy. And in the Clementine recognitions is pretending that, okay, this is the same James that, or at least it's interpreting it that way, that this is the same James that Paul is in conflict with in Galatians, in the epistle to the Galatians. And the thing is, I know that Dr. Richard Carrier says, when Origen cites this passage in the James passage in Josephus, he says that James, the brother of Jesus, son of Damianus, was confused with our James. That's what he says. And I do find that argument very interesting. I find that argument very interesting because it would explain, if that is correct, it would explain why Origen doesn't quote the Testimonium. He does not mention the crucifixion of Jesus, but he'll talk about James only. Now, some that will defend the authenticity of the text will say, well, you see, it says that James is the brother of Jesus who was called the Christ. So they'll say, well, that's past tense to refer to the Testimonium, the text that Origen doesn't quote. And Origen's mad at Celsus, whom's saying, oh, it's all BS, guys. And Origen's saying, well, here's the James passage, but he doesn't quote the crucifixion of Jesus in Josephus. He'll mention John the Baptist and his death. He'll mention James's death in Josephus, but he can't find the crucifixion of Jesus in there. Now, some will say, well, Celsus isn't viewing this as myth. In a way, that's true, because Celsus claims that a Roman soldier fathered Jesus, called a Pantera, apparently, which is strange. He might, I suspect, if that's true, that Pantera was if some Jew called Pantera was a father of Jesus, he probably confused that guy with Tiberius Julius Abdus Pandera, the Roman soldier that they found his tombstone in Germany, I think. So Celsus might have been aware of that guy, and they have the same name, so I'm going to say that's the father, as a way of criticizing Christians.
Does it annoy you when you find elements of truth in the life of Brian?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would like you, if you don't mind, I would like you to send me links to a couple of the things that you're reading that I haven't read.
Sure, I will.
I would appreciate that. The bits about Celsus and so forth, because I haven't read that.
Yeah, Celsus says some very strange things.
There's another thing that I thought was telling in the story of Jesus, and Christians almost never bring this up. I mean, I've never heard a Christian bring this up. I find it in the Bible, but Christians don't talk about it.
Exactly.
And one of those things is like when they meet Jesus in the flesh after he was crucified, his own mother doesn't recognize him. Nobody can recognize him. His own friends. There's this guy they insist is their Jesus, but it's some other guy. And so I'm thinking that these people are so desperate in their mysticism and their want to believe. You know, if you just convince yourself beyond all reason that something is true, then it becomes true. So then you convince yourself that that guy is Jesus.
Right.
Even though his own mother says no.
Yeah, there's another offer that, and this guy doesn't believe that. He doesn't believe in the theological aspects of the biblical story, but he says, "Oh, look, I found all these guys in real history," and then it gets really bad. He starts saying, "Jesus ben Ananus, Jesus son of Gamala, Jesus son of Gamaliel, and Crestus and Suetonius." He'll even say King Arthur, Izates of Adiabene. They're all the same guy. He actually believes that. And he comes up with these wild conspiracy theories about it. And I'm like, oh, come on. And he'll say, well, you see, what happened is the Romans took the story from the AD 60s and they backtracked it to the AD 30s. That because they were trying to create a pacifistic version. I mean, come on. That's not how it happened. That's ridiculous. And or people thinking that that, or some people trying to say that the Gospels are written in the 8040s, or some people trying to say they found Gospels in the Dead Sea Scrolls. What's this text called?
If they found Gospels in the Dead Sea, I haven't heard that one.
7Q5. So there's been an argument that O'Callahan made that 7Q5 is actually a fragment of the Gospel of Mark. And that's been so hard, in such a hardcore way, it has been debunked brutally by Dead Sea Scroll scholars. I'm like, no, that's, if anything, it's actually quoting Second Enoch. That's what I've heard, and it's not quoting it's not a fragment of Mark. And there's many differences. There's some similarities, but there's also several differences between the way the text is read and the way Mark is talking about it. And
if I remember correctly, Gospel of Thomas was with the Coptic Gospels, was it not? In Egypt?
I think it was, yes. Cyril of Jerusalem says that the Gospel of Thomas was written in the 3rd century by Thomas, the disciple of Mani, a Persian prophet figure.
Ah, okay.
Which some people say, oh, come on. You see, Cyril just doesn't want to say. Cyril's saying this because he doesn't want to say the Gospel of Thomas dates earlier. But if you read the Gospel of Thomas, it's so Gnostic. Like, there's some people that will say the Gospel of Thomas is the Q document, the hypothetical document that Matthew and Luke used. That some will say even predates Paul. There's some people say that some people will go with something that I call absolute Thomasian priority, which is a very strange position. That Thomas is first. He's first.
Have you read the account of creation in the Nag Hammadi library?
I don't think I did.
I
think I missed that one.
It's unintelligible. I had a very difficult time reading it. And of course I'm reading a translation.
Right.
So I have no idea how far the translation deviated from what was originally intended, but it was a very difficult read. What I got out of it, though, was kind of fascinating. That there's a handful of goddesses that created Yahweh. And Yahweh, Jehovah, was created as an abortion that lived. And this is how the gospel got.
Now that you're saying this, it does sound familiar. I might have heard a different version of it.
Now, the funny thing is that when these goddesses create Jehovah, and then they back away into the darkness,
right?
So that he wakes up alone, and in his infinite arrogance, decided that since there's nobody around, he must have created himself.
Yeah, I heard something very similar to that. So the monad, the highest god in Gnosticism, he's practically Marcion's god too, because Marcion kind of got the ball rolling with Gnosticism in the 140s AD. So what's happening here is like, okay, so Sophia did something, she screws up and she's cast down to the lower emanations, and she's the mother of Yaldabaoth, the Gnostic version of Yahweh, and basically, yes, I heard that part, that he created everything in order to basically he wanted to create a universe where everybody's subservient to him in his own ego, and I think it says something about him purposely sabotaging Adam and Eve so that they will be cast out. Something like that.
That makes sense in Genesis too, because obviously he set a trap.
Yeah, because he worked with the wicked kings. I think I did read this creation story, or something very close to it. He says Yaldabaoth worked with the wicked kings, and they were responsible for the cast out of Adam and Eve. These are some brutal guys, not very nice people, very hateful. And in Gnosticism, Yaldabaoth he's in control. And Jesus was sent to free us from Yaldabaoth.
Would you mind please sharing some of the sources that you have that I haven't been able to, that I haven't read?
I'll have to go find it, but I will send that to you for sure.
I appreciate it.
I definitely will.
I don't like talking outside of my realm, and if I haven't read it myself, and I can't comment on it.
Right. I understand that. Um, yeah, it's really puzzling. Like, okay, so if all these Jesuses and Josephus are the same guy, did he die many times and resurrect many times? How many times does it take?
Yeah, but there was only
Right.
the one unnamed. He wasn't even named Jesus.
Yeah, and
And
aren't
the only references that Josephus ever made to the actual Christian thing was stuff that universally accepted that he wasn't talking about, or that it wasn't an actual statement, that it was like an interpolation or an insertion after the fact, that somebody else came in and modified it
hmm
because they wanted it to talk about Jesus.
yeah, there's been a case made that either Pamphilus or Eusebius made the insertion within the 100 years after origin of
I've
Alexandria.
only ever heard of Eusebius doing this.
Yeah, Dr. Carrier actually thinks Pamphilus was the author. He thinks Pamphilus is possibly the author of the Testimonium, and he's Eusebius's mentor, and Pamphilus owned Origen's library before Eusebius did. So Origen, what's interesting is this is the literary circle that apparently makes these insertions, and what they do is they address Origen's complaints. Origen's complaining, Josephus doesn't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. He doesn't believe Jesus was the Christ. How dare he say that it was the death of James that caused the war, not the death of Jesus? And Dr. Carey will go further by saying, well, actually, Origen confused Hegesippus with Josephus because Josephus didn't say that. Hegesippus is the one that said the death of James caused the war. So now that would demonstrate further how confused Origen is, and that would make him less reliable as a source to counter the arguments that the Testimonium and the James passage are not interpolations. It's definitely a powerful argument that goes against the authenticity. And I'm like, okay, at best, it's like I can see, regardless of which way the wind blows there, it looks like at the end of the tunnel, if there was a real guy, he's been lost so far deep into history that he's been practically replaced by a fictional character.
Excuse me. A few fictional characters.
Yeah,
Like the story about
conglomerated.
the story about John the Baptist, baptizing Jesus and then telling his own followers, now you follow this guy. We've seen a number of different religions use this kind of appropriation where the central hero tells all their followers to now follow this guy instead.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not whatever really happens. So Joseph, that story of John the Baptist baptizing Jesus and then telling his followers to follow him, that's bullshit. That didn't happen. I think that John the Baptist was a real guy. He clearly had a following, and then he had the story written about him where his popularity was appropriated and then bestowed onto Jesus. And then later, the Muslims did the same thing when they had I wish I could get a hold of the original. I had the original here in my house somewhere. The story from like the 1200s about a Persian who goes into Arab lands, and he's looking for Jesus, and he meets Jesus. Jesus never died on the cross, was never crucified in Islamic tradition.
Yeah,
because they hold that it was Judas who was crucified, not Jesus. So Jesus never died. Jesus doesn't die. Jesus lives forever, and he goes around healing people. So every day, Jesus comes out of his house and heals a bunch of people. And so this Persian, who's questioning his Zoroastrian religion, comes to meet Jesus, and Jesus tells him that, well, I'm not the final prophet. The final prophet is Muhammad, and you need to follow Muhammad now. So anybody really think that Jesus would say, well, I'm not the final prophet, so you have to go follow Muhammad? No, this is the same thing that happened with John the Baptist, saying now you have to follow Jesus. So we know that there's a number of fictional characters that were integrated into the Jesus story in various places. And my sincere suspicion is that if we had a time machine and somebody who spoke Aramaic and we could go hunt down Jesus, first problem, I think, is that there would be too many of them.
Yeah.
I think there would be more than one Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that the story that Jesus had, if you could find the one guy on which most of it is based on, if you brought that guy forward in time and showed him Jesus Christ Superstar or the Passion of the Christ, he wouldn't recognize either of these movies as being about him.
Yeah.
God, I'm sorry about the dogs. They've got to ruin every podcast. So I think that finding Jesus is a bit like finding King Arthur or Robin Hood. If you found Robin Hood might have heard of Little John, but he would never have heard of Maid Marian, because those stories appeared centuries later. They were made up by other people. So Dracula is another great example. If you go find you can find Vlad Tepes, but is he going to recognize any of these movies as being about him? And neither would Jesus.
Right. He wouldn't.
Yeah, and so King Arthur wouldn't have known who Lancelot would have. If you can find King Arthur, you would have never have heard of Lancelot.
Right.
And all of and so these are largely fictionalized characters. If there was a kernel of historic truth to it, then most of it is gone. And things that Robin Hood would think that he would be remembered for, all forgotten. The only thing anybody remembers Robin Hood for are stuff we made up about him centuries later. Jesus would have been in the same way. At best, first century faith healer trying to scam people by doing parlor tricks.
Right.
A guy who doesn't understand about anything. He's pretending to cure diseases he doesn't know the cause of.
Yeah, and Paul, some guy writing later, is hijacking this character. And he's like, well, you see, this guy was actually he was a reformer, a Jewish reformer, and he portrays Jesus as having the same position that he does. And he gets into arguments, really, really heated arguments with Cephas and James and Galatians, or more directly with Cephas, that, you see, he's actually he's against circumcision just like I am. And Cephas like, oh no, you gotta keep it in there because it says that in the Torah. It also reminds me of an argument that took place in late 8020s, early 8030s between some guy called Ananias and a guy called Eleazar. They were debating. They were arguing over then Prince Izates of Adiabeni. He was saying, and Ananias was saying to Izates, hey, you don't need to circumcise. Eleazar is saying, no, he does need to circumcise. And I found that to be a very similar argument. Is going on.
We're seeing in the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah, that unfortunately, didn't make it into canon, but that's where I thought was the only wisdom we ever see attributed to Jesus. When his disciples ask him how he feels about circumcision, and he says that if God wanted men to be circumcised, we wouldn't be born with foreskins.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like, unless God screwed up, and that's just another way of saying he's not omniscient, he's not all-knowing if he screwed up.
Yeah, that we were recalled.
Yeah.
And of course, the circumcision, the purpose for that is to diminish sexual pleasure, because Abrahamic religion has a huge problem with sex.
Right.
And it's also the most sensitive organ. And so in order to show your absolute devotion, you have to mutilate your most sensitive organ at a time when they didn't have anesthetic. And so grown-ups were doing this. We're chopping the tips off their penises for this, just to show how committed they were to this nonsense.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to have to let you go, but
sure.
I very much enjoyed our conversation. We should have another one.
Yeah, we
but
should.
I want to do my homework first.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and to share this video. Check the links in the description. If any of you want to go further in supporting this channel, check out the PayPal and Patreon links, and/or donate through super chats and future live streams and/or future premieres. Thanks for watching, guys. Hello, viewers. Thank you for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends. And please consider becoming a member of the channel's Patreon page, and/or donating through PayPal, or donating through super chats in future live streams or in future premieres. Each donation helps me to continue to cover costs in order for me to continue to edit these videos professionally in high quality, so that way I can deliver the best content that I can to you, the viewers. Thank you.